Hello there, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I am so excited to be here with you today. Today is Wednesday, April 12th, I believe, and it might be the 13th. But today is my Monday, and a lot of times it's hard for me to get going on Mondays, as I'm sure that all of you can relate to, right? And so it feels really good to have this level of excitement, certainly fueled by a little extra caffeine, which is nothing wrong with that, as long as it's a little bit left of extra caffeine, everything in moderation, right? And when I say extra caffeine, believe me, it is nothing compared to what I used to put in my body. I remember one time going to an acupuncturist, and in that sort of in the intake form that they have you fill out all the stuff, right? Like what the pre-existing conditions, what your parents have had, all that kind of stuff. You ever had surgery, so on and so forth. And one of the questions is, how much coffee do you, or how many cups of coffee do you have every day? And I put 10. I mean, I thought that was maybe even a little, low, right? Because like I'll have easily like 5, like 20-ounce or 6 of those, so I mean, in terms of like a cup of coffee being an 8-ounce cup, what is that? I would do, let's say, 6 20-ounce cups. That's 120 ounces divided by 8. What is that? That's, that's over 10. And I remember the acupuncturist saying, 10? 10 cups of coffee every day? So now, as I've told you all, I drink tea, and the strongest tea I have is about like 3/4 of a cup of coffee, right? So then that's the strongest one, and there's no way I've had anywhere near 10 of those today. So trust me, your guy is just fine in terms of nobody's gonna, have any damage. Nobody's gonna, sustain any damage through this caffeine intake to get this podcast to you today. So anyway, thank you for indulging me with that little introduction and talking about my caffeine intake. I like to keep you abreast. Well, I wanted to do a podcast today on a subject that I actually, it's so funny with these, TikTok videos. As I've told you all, I do these TikTok videos every day, or not quite every day, but but frequently I do them, and then I post the same content to Instagram and Facebook and everything else. But on TikTok, it's pretty amazing. It's happened to me like 3 or 4 times now, right? Where I've had like pretty viral videos, right? The one that I did just the other day on my Friday, your Sunday. It got like, it's coming up on like 3,000 views, right? I have one that has like over 11,000 views, right? These are big numbers for a guy like me. I'm pretty psyched about it. But the thing that's really remarkable about it and really beautiful and says a lot is that the ones that do that well are the ones that I just sit and I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do a video. Why not? And I'll just kind of, I think of something, yeah, let me do a video about this, start, go, and those are the ones that typically have gone, like really kind of viral. And so on my Friday, your Sunday, I did a post that went pretty viral. As I said, it's almost 3,000 views, a couple of hundred likes. For me, that's viral. There's people on TikTok who have a lot bigger audience than that, but for me, it's pretty, it feels pretty substantial, right? And so the topic and the reason why I did the video, again, it was very impromptu. It was very sort of spur of the moment, right? And the reason I did it was because I had heard, or I'd seen rather, like 3 or 4 videos in the last like 2 days, that were all very much had the same, message behind them, which I found really fascinating. It just felt very synchronistic, right? That I was experiencing all these different videos that were all talking about loving yourself just as you are, right? And so I wanted to do a video about that, right? And so I'm going to share with you in a little more, maybe elaboration, a little more depth, what I was talking about on my Friday, your Sunday on TikTok, okay, for almost 3,000 people, right? So the first thing that first of all, I was not, it was a little bit of a, a counter email, right? I was proposing a counter sort of argument to the idea of loving yourself just as you are. Now, there's nothing wrong with loving yourself the way you are, and I would never be someone who'd tell you don't love yourself the way you are, right? And by all means, and part of what these videos were getting at was that we don't need to fix ourselves to become lovable, right? And that's really what they were getting at, right? They're like, you don't need to lose 20 pounds to be lovable. You don't need to get that degree to be lovable. You don't need to, get a new car or get a new purse or get a new pair of shoes or get a new hobby or a new side hustle or something like that, right? You don't need any of that in order to be lovable for yourself. Right. That I agree with 100%. And really, what the essence of that is that there's a lot of forces out there that tell us otherwise. Right. And I talk about this openly with you. You all know that I used to be in the advertising industry and at the very top levels. Right. Like I was working at those ad agencies that you saw on Mad Men. Right. Like I was at the very top of that world, like the true, corporate advertising world. Right. And I know what it's like. It is designed to make you feel incomplete. It is designed to make you feel that you're not there yet, right? And that's what they thrive on. That's the whole game in advertising. And it works. Okay, it works really, really well. Really funny statistic I heard just the other day that 75 or 73%, I think it was 70 something percent of all advertising in the US is by pharmaceutical companies. Whoa. And what are pharmaceutical companies telling you? Oh, it's not okay that you have high blood pressure. Well, of course, it's not okay that you have high blood pressure. But they're saying like, oh, don't worry about your high blood pressure. Don't stop eating pizza. Here, take this pill, right? Or they're telling you, maybe you, what other, what other pharmaceutical products are out there, right? It's all about what you can do with medical enhancement to make yourself better, right? Now, again, I agree with these people who were posting the other day that there's no making you better. There's no such thing. It's a false premise. It doesn't exist that way. And I'm right here to tell you that, okay? However, okay, and I'm going to tell you a line that I came up with in my TikTok video the other day that, quite frankly, I'm very proud of, okay? And this is pretty much what I was saying in the TikTok video, is that for many people out there, when you say, okay, love yourself exactly the way you are, you don't have to do anything to be lovable, right? Well, for those of us who have experienced high levels of trauma in our lives and who live with this complex post-traumatic stress disorder that comes from that trauma, well, there's something inherently unlovable. Now, it's very important here that I pause and I remind you, and I actually made a note here. I'm just going to check that I made a note after my TikTok video. So it's not that there is something unlovable about you or about me who have been through trauma, right? But there's something unlovable about the nervous system, and this is the line, the nervous system we have that has been forged in the fires of trauma. Isn't that a good line? Oh, I was so happy about that one. But that's what it is, right? If you, like me, have suffered from trauma in your life, well, then there's your nervous system. It's not you, but your system, the way that you process what happens around you and the way you process what happens internally is not like everyone else. It is severely slanted, let's put it that way. It sees emergency where most people see, curious, right? And so there's something unlovable about that, right? Like I know from myself, when I go through a trauma trigger and response, and sometimes that can last for days. Even me, who's been doing this work for so long, sometimes I can go through days of feeling that response to a trigger that happens in my life. And that doesn't mean that for days I'm, hysterically crying and can't function, but for days I'm feeling, affected by that, right? And so the thing is, right, that oftentimes when I'm coming out of this state, there's always some level of guilt involved, right? Because I snapped at people, or I yelled, or back in the day I would have put my fist through a wall, or broken something, or or insulted someone or something like that, like just venting my own anger but taking it out on people around me. That's what I personally used to do. I don't know if that's the way you handle trauma, but that's the way I used to handle trauma. And so in the end, in the aftermath of that, in the wake of that response, there's guilt. And the problem is here. And there's somebody who's a listener who I hope you're listening today, with the initial CK, who sent me this beautiful, beautiful. It's a pictograph, right? It's an infograph, a pictograph that was illustrating the difference between guilt and shame. Okay. And this is the core of what I'm talking about here. Because for those of us who possess this nervous system that was forged in the fires of trauma, this nervous system I have, motivates me to take action when I'm having this trauma response that hurts people around me. And so therefore, instead of feeling the natural and appropriate guilt in that moment, which, I can feel guilty for what I did. The difference between guilt and shame is that guilt is your performance, an action that you committed, whereas shame is your essence. It's who you are. And that's the problem, right? That when we're in that trauma response, or as a result of the trauma in our lives, we have a way of personalizing, of identifying with that nervous system response. And therefore, instead of feeling the guilt, which is something that you can get through and you can apologize, you can make amends, you can work it out, we feel shame in those moments. And that's where it becomes something that we feel, deeply unlovable. So when you ask someone, tell someone, just love yourself the way you are, to somebody who struggles with trauma and CPTSD, that ain't so easy. In fact, that could be downright impossible for us. And so the beautiful thing here, and I think this is why everything went viral, right, is because there's a middle. There's a third way, a middle way, okay? There's a place that's between the self-hate of the identified shame that we have, right? And there's a difference between that and, or in the space between that and the love yourself just the way you are, just because, which feels kind of arbitrary, which if it works for you, beautiful. But for those of us with trauma, that's probably not going to work, right? So there's a place in between those, right? And that place in between those is compassion. Right? Specifically, self-compassion. In the practice of self-compassion, in the act of self-compassion, what we're doing is we're honoring the suffering that this nervous system that was forged in the fires of trauma is doing. We honor the suffering that it's causing, pardon me. We hold that suffering in the caring of our own heart, and we hold it with gentleness and with softness and with a pardon me, with a level of care. Pardon me. And so the beautiful thing that happens then, right? Two really beautiful things happen when we practice in this way, right? Number one is that we start separating ourselves from the nervous system, right? Because it's not you, it's not me, it's the experiences that we've had, pardon me, that create this. Remember, the nervous system was forged in the fires of trauma. Pardon me, which means that without that trauma, you wouldn't have this nervous system that does all these things, that makes you so uncomfortable, that makes you lash out at the people around you, that makes you do these things that cause you such shame later on. You wouldn't have it if not for the trauma, folks. That's the thing. It comes from the experience. It is not you. It is not the essential you. It is not, it's not how you were born. Although some of this, of course, is intergenerational. If you experience trauma as a child, there's very, very high percentage probability that your parents experience trauma, their parents experience trauma. That's the way trauma works. It's like links in a chain until somebody breaks it, which is what we're here to do, right? And so that's where self-compassion comes in, right? Self-compassion allows us again to separate me from this thing that from the actions that my nervous system motivates me to do. I can disidentify with it. Right? So now I'm looking at it from out here, and now for those of you on the podcast, I'm just holding my arms out at arm's length, like my nervous system response feels like it's out here, not completely enveloping me. The Buddhists have a wonderful way of explaining this, and they say that once you can see the raging river, you are no longer in the raging river. Okay? And that's the idea, because once we can get to that place of not being in the raging river, but seeing it from a little bit of a removed and detached perspective, that's where we are allowed to heal. Okay, because once I realize that it's not me, I almost said once I identify that it's non-identified, but once I grasp that it's not me, right? It's just the way my body, quite frankly, it's the awesome way that my body created this response to stay safe in a very dangerous situation. And I did it when I was very young, and I should be proud of myself for that. I shouldn't hate it, but I don't have to love it either, because it doesn't serve me. And I think I got sidetracked as I started telling you. At the tail end of all of these trauma responses, I feel that shame. And I often I might start crying here as I'm talking about this. Like recently, I had a pretty bad thing that happened because of, some parents and stuff. And I literally said to my wife, I said, I don't want to be in this body anymore. It really sucks to be in this body. Not because my body's too fat, or not because it's getting old, not because of the wrinkles or the gray hair or the eyes. I just had to have an eye exam done and I need new glasses. I don't hate my body for all of that. I hate this nervous system that I have these triggers that come from out of nowhere, and they just completely destroy everything. Don't ask me to love that. Because it's not going to happen. Frankly, I shouldn't say I hate it either. That there's a middle ground there too, right? Because that's part of what self-compassion is, right? So part of what self-compassion is to notice and to again hold that suffering that this nervous system creates for me. Hold that in a caring and loving way, and then realizing that 25% of the population at large is dealing with a similar kind of suffering that I have. And so that's what self-compassion does, is it allows us, when we can hold our own suffering, now we notice that this suffering is not isolating me from the rest of the world the way it's always felt like it was doing, but instead it's connecting me to the rest of humanity in a really kind of beautiful way, right? It's connecting me. And as I said, there's generations of suffering that have happened before me in my family that's all trickled down into me. This suffering connects me to all of them. And that's something else that's really powerful because, there are times where I feel like, like I literally, want to smash them. I take pictures and want to smash the pictures of my grandparents. How dare you give me this horrible thing? But that's not going to change anything, right? Acceptance is what's going to change it, because in the acceptance, that's what compassion requires, right? It requires we notice and accept the suffering, and then feeling that connection. Now that gives me a chance to soothe myself and to make myself feel better through kind words, and even, giving myself a hug, or, in some trauma work, it's about screaming at the top of your lungs, right? Whatever that thing is that you need, you give it to yourself. And once you've done that, once you've gone through that process of soothing yourself, that's where healing begins. That's where you are allowed to heal from this. That's where you're allowed to let it be, and let yourself experience it fully. And on the other side of that, on the other side of all that feeling it and all that healing it, that is where you can honestly and authentically and naturally love yourself exactly the way you are. Only through that compassion. All right, folks. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I did. I'll be back again tomorrow. Schedule's pretty light. Definitely affords it. So I'll see you tomorrow. Don't know what I'm going to talk about yet, so we'll see what that is. But anyway, thank you for joining me today. I wish you well, and I will be back soon. I just told you that. But I will welcome the opportunity to speak to you again tomorrow. Take care, everybody.